So, Marquise Goodwin opts not to play the 2020 NFL season for honestly reasons I completely get. Um, Sorry to hear about that. Three miscarriages from his wife. He's lost over three children in the course of those pregnancies. He's got a 5-month-old. They're just trying to start their family. I get it, man. You got an at-risk wife, you got an at-risk kid. I get it. But what does that mean for the Eagles roster? Like, how do we shape this thing going forward? What answers do we have right now about this wide receiver core? So today, let's take a look at projecting maybe the wide receiver position as the 53-man roster pertains. All right, let's get it. What's up, Eagles Nation? What's going on, NFL world? How you doing, division rivals? This is Steven Hyder with Gate City Sports Channel, the sports channel where the cerebral NFL fan comes for about 10 minutes of daily content. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever it is you get around to watching us. Once again, guys, my name is Steven Hyder, and this is Gate City Sports Channel. All right, y'all, today's topic. Hey, look, I wish Marquise Goodwin the best. I've been on record saying that I thought his chances of making the roster were, I said he was far from a lock. So I'm assuming there was an honest conversation with him and they told him where he stood. And then just given the nature of being a veteran, being in the league this long, hey, I kind of get it, guys. I mean, you got a young kid. There's no guarantees here. Why subject yourself to the risk of bringing this back home to your family? I understand the move that he made. Now, I will say this. The Eagles do control his rights, as I understand it, for 2021 now. So even though he restructured that contract to like $1.3 million contract with like a $1 million incentive-based part of it, now from what I understand is that they'll basically you take that 2020 contract and it gets flipped over to 2021. So they still control his rights technically for 2021. And obviously he would probably only qualify for the $150,000, which I don't think is a concern to some of these guys. I think, obviously your veteran minimum guys and those kind of guys, like, of course, that it's a major concern. But some of the guys that have been around and made a little bit of coinage and have other, let's be real, he's got a YouTube channel. He probably has income coming in from that YouTube channel. He probably has sponsors. He probably has a lot of other things, guys, that keeps his family fed. So I certainly understand the move. Now, what I will say is, what does that mean for the Philadelphia Eagles? Like, to me, the one thing that can be said is Greg Ward Jr. is probably clearly going to be the slot guy. And in the last video I made, I kind of alluded to that, guys, that I thought Greg Ward Jr. is the only guy we have with real experience playing the slot. And he hasn't really played that long. But he was pretty good in it last year. So as I'm looking at it and I'm projecting, I think Deshaun Jackson clearly is a guarantee. I think at this point, we moved Alshon Jeffery to the PUP list, which, guys, understand there's a difference between the active PUP and the reserved PUP. So active PUP means that we can basically reassess it before the beginning of the season. Now, if we move him to the reserve PUP, that puts him out, I think, for a minimum of 6 weeks. So we do have a decision kind of looming with Alshon Jeffery. We've heard Doug Peterson talk on Alshon Jeffery a little bit and say that he's, pleasantly surprised with the progress he's made. If you guys have watched any Lord Brunson's videos, I think even Philly 500 recently mentioned it. Apparently, Alshon Jeffery came in an incredible weight. He's in really good shape. And that's a really good thing for a Liz Frank injury because, let's be real, you don't want to keep adding pressure to your foot. That's like one of the worst things you can do with a Liz Frank. So thinning yourself out a little bit and getting a little better shape probably would do a lot to help him. Guys, I'm out of my element here. I'm not a doctor, so I can't give you a real timetable for Alshon Jeffery's return. But what I can tell you is I've suffered an injury very similar to a Liz Frank, and it's a difficult recovery to come back from because you never quite feel right in your foot again. Every time you step on it, every time you run on it, sometimes you get phantom pains and there's like a weird discomfort. I don't know how to explain it, guys, but it feels different on the top of your foot. With that said, I think at this point we all realize that having Alshon Jeffery around on the roster is probably a good idea at this point because, the Eagles could have made a very rash decision and just cut him, give him a June 1st designation and cut him, and then we probably really would be in a little more peculiar, I should say, situation. Right now, I look at it as you got Alshon going to the PUP, which on active, he does count against your roster. So you got Alshon Jeffery, you got Deshaun Jackson. I think, obviously, Whiteside's going to be a lock to make the roster. And I also think, as of right now, clearly Jalen Reagor is a lock to make your roster. So there's 4 guys. Now, I know a lot of guys will be like, oh, man, not JJ. I get it, guys. I'm not saying that he should be warranted to make it. I'm saying that it's hard to separate from second-round picks. I think the only modern example we have of the Eagles giving up on a second-round pick this kind of, this type of speed was Jaquan Jarrett. I mean, just think about how many there's been, and you got one example. Like, it's just really rare for that to happen. Now, guys, don't get too far down on JJ. It was bad. I showed you the film. We all know it was bad. However, guys can develop. Development can occur. And he was a little banged up last year. I don't think that excuses the route running, but you got a guy in here named Aaron Moorhead who knows this position. He can command a locker room. He's going to get these guys on the same page, and they're not going to be out there looking like fools trying to run switch routes. I think Aaron Moorhead's going to knock that crap out. He's going to take care of that stuff. That's my opinion on it. So as I look at those 4 guys, it really comes down to, like, are we keeping 5? Are we keeping 6? Are we keeping 7? I'm going to be honest with you. I'm really confused on the NFL's rules. I know they expanded the practice squad apparently to 14 players. But my question is how does this active roster thing work? The last time I heard you could carry 55 people on the active roster for a short window of time, but I never heard the short window of time definitively, defined. So I don't know what that even means. Like, what defined short window of time? But like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, half the season, like defined short window of time, basically. And then obviously last I heard they were going to expand the active game day roster from 46 to I believe 48 now. Somewhere in that area, guys. So definitely there's some movement going on here. Some reason to suspect that the Eagles might go 7 wide receivers. Early on in this entire situation, as I project your 53-man roster for the wide receivers, this isn't a complete 53. This is prior to training camp. How do I see the wide receivers? Some news and notes as it pertains to the training camp schedule. Guys, right now they're only going through administrative level stuff. They're not going through practices. They may be doing some playbook stuff. They may be watching some film, but it's mostly administrative stuff, getting your jersey, your helmet, your pads, doing the COVID stuff, all that kind of, ordeal. In 2 weeks, they can finally start 9-on-7 drills. That's the first time you're going to see them on pads. I do think that prior to that, I can't remember the exact date, guys, but they can be in helmets without pads. It's going to take 3 weeks before you can do 11-on-11 full contact drills. The end of training camp will be September 5th will be your final cuts. So this is kind of what we have to talk about, guys. How does all this information you now have impact your 53-man roster when it comes to the wide receiver position? I see it as the 4 I named. Alshon, Deshaun, right? Then you got Jalen Reagor, and you got J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. I see those 4. I think John Hightower is your 5th. I think Greg Ward Jr. is your 6th. And I think Quez Watkins will be maintained on this roster as your 7th. Now, I have an outside possibility of Rob Davis. If Rob Davis is just so far ahead of these guys and can prove himself, I do think there's a very, very outside chance of it, but I'm not going to project that pre-training camp just because he's got to really prove it in training camp, and I don't think he has as many opportunities to prove himself over the rookies. So it kind of works both ways. But he does have a leg up on knowing this system a little bit better. Not that he's, an expert in our system, but he spent some weeks in it at the end of the season. So as I kind of sit down and I look at the situation, guys, I go with those 7 guys. And I got one guy going over to the practice squad, which is Manasseh Bailey. I think Manasseh Bailey is a guy who's going to compete next year because we're going to have guys that are going to get cut off this roster. I don't think Alshon and Djax are back next year. I'm just going to be upfront and I'm going to be honest about that, guys. So as I shape it, those are the 7 guys that I'm putting on the roster. What are my expectations for how these guys are going to line up? I think week 1, you're going to see J.J. Arcega-Whiteside as your X. I think you're going to see Greg Ward Jr. as your Y. And I think your Z is going to be Deshaun Jackson. Although, Jalen Reagor said something, and it perked my ears a little bit.
They've just been emphasizing to me to, learn X and Z.
So, let me give you my perspective on this. I will say pump the brakes a little bit, and don't just think that, once again, this is Doug Peterson saying nonsense on one thing, and then the player turns around and contradicts him. I think the question was flawed because the question made a really bad assumption.
Team, I know Doug mentioned in June that you're probably going to learn the X spot behind Deshaun Jack.
They didn't understand the difference between the Z and the X. They said, D Jackson U on the X, and they're actually Z's, not X. I think it confused Jalen a little bit, and he's like, well, we're training on both. I'm training on both outside receiver positions. I don't know if we should take everything in face value there because I do think that the reporter misled the question a little bit. With that said, guys, I think Reagor is going to be your fourth guy off the bench, and it would not shock me to see that kid take over things and start becoming one of your main focuses. There's going to be a lot of receiver talent, and, let's be real, getting Alshon Jeffery back later in the season, hey, man, it could be a trade bait scenario, or, to be real with you, it could be a really big punch in the arm for the offense. Having JJ, having Alshon, then you got guys like, those two guys are contested catch guys. Then you got bigger tight ends like Goddard, and you got bigger tight ends like, well, he's not really bigger, but you got Ertz, right? A possession guy. Then you got your speedsters, right? And your, Jalen Reagors, and you got your guys like your Quez Watkins and your Deshaun Jacksons and your John Hightowers who can bring a lot of vertical element to the offense. And then you got a possession guy just like Ertz and Greg Ward Jr., who I also think is a possession receiver. I definitely kind of like the mix a little bit here, assuming Alshon can come back as on the roster. And, I definitely think you get a little more versatility. At least for one season, guys, I really like what's going on here. My question is, and I'll flip it back on you guys at the end of the video, can any of you guys see one of these rookies sneaking up and just outright, displacing one of the vets? Reagor taking over, maybe, he trains on the outside, they move him inside, and they're like, we're getting a kid on the field, he's playing the slot. Or does Reagor, start playing at the X? Maybe we take him at face value that he's been working at the X, and then JJ just can't compete with Jalen. I mean, what about John Hightower guys or Quez Watkins? Can you see one of these guys really coming up and out-competing someone else? It's an interesting discussion to me, guys, because I can definitely see the merit there. What I'm going to say is the most likely candidate to outcompete this year is Jalen Reagor. Jalen Reagor could legitimately knock down a Greg Ward Jr., could legitimately knock down a J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. I think John Hightower, he's going to get some reps. He's going to get game. You're going to see him in games, but I don't know that he's ready right away. What I do love, guys, is I love the aspects of our kick return and our punt return being a whole lot better right now. All right, y'all. These are my thoughts. You already know what I'm going to say. I want to know, what do you think? Leave your comments down below. Y'all know what time it is. It's time to do a little EAGLES. All right, y'all. Let's go, Eagles.